Let's talk winning an interview. There's one equation that will set you apart and help you get to that next step, and that is, honestly, be likable, competent, and qualified. So, before going into an interview, the company already has a copy of your resume. With this, they know that you're at least a 70 to 80% fit for the actual position. Now, for the actual interview, the structure can vary quite a bit, but all interviews do start off in the same format with the introduction. And the introduction honestly sets the tone of the interview. So, for the introductions, just a firm handshake, eye contact, and introduce yourself. Of course, via Skype or over the phone, you can't really do the firm handshake, but I would recommend that nice, warm greeting. Now, one thing to keep in mind is after you introduce yourself, then the interviewer will introduce themselves. Remember their name. This is a sales technique, and it actually is very effective. Now, after the introductions, here's where the interview can go a few different directions. But I would always recommend practicing a tell me about yourself. A tell me about yourself is really a reflection of your background aligned with the job description. So for the tell me about yourself, start off by highlighting your resume. Highlight the sections that are pertinent to the job order and use that as your outline to script this tell me about yourself. Now, following the tell me about yourself, the interview's still in the interviewer's hands. And at this point, they can ask quite a few different questions. No matter what, answer the questions that they ask. Never say, I don't know. If you do not know the answer to a question, give the process that you would take to actually answer the question. Also, for the more behavioral, more subjective questions, you can actually practice these in advance. And honestly, if you can answer these 7 basic questions, you'll be able to answer pretty much any variation of the questions that the interviewers ask, the more behavioral ones, of course. And these questions are, what are your greatest strengths, weaknesses, accomplishments, failures, leadership style, why this company, why this position? For the negative questions, weakness and failure. Honestly, the company really doesn't care about your weaknesses or when you failed. You're human. You've done both. So what I would recommend doing is formulating these answers strategically, letting the interviewer know, hey, look, I'm this person that can identify something I need to work on and start to improve it. I'm this constant learner and grower. Or for a failure, well, what do you do when you fail? Do you walk away from the problem, or do you develop a policy so that no one else makes the same mistake? Now, for the accomplishments, always tailor your accomplishments towards the position at hand so that you can show that your assets lie within what the organization is actually looking for. So, for those final 2 questions, why this company, why this position? For researching the company, start off with the vision, values, and mission statement. Those 3 areas are extremely important to any organization, and preface the answer to your question with that information, or with information that you learned from your research. Now, for that final question, why this position? Well, you're obviously interviewing for this position because you're a fit. You've had experience in the field or you're educated in the field. So start off with that experience and then go into your interest for the actual position. Now, after the interviewer is done asking you questions, the interview's in your hands. And I would recommend formulating at least 5 strategic questions and asking anywhere from 2 to 4. The reason I said 5 is because oftentimes your questions are addressed throughout the course of the interview, and you don't want any redundancies. So for questions, do not ask selfish questions. Stay away from anything to do with salary, benefits, location, 401k matching. Stay away from all of that. Instead, wait to ask those questions until you know that the job is yours. For the salary question, never be the first one to throw out that salary number or even ask the question. Basic negotiations. The first one to throw out that number loses, so don't do so. Instead, ask questions that you really care about and that you want to know the answer to. Honestly, you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. So what I would recommend doing is learning everything you possibly can about the opportunity. So when asking questions, again, don't ask anything selfish or negative. Instead, keep everything very positive and, of course, in line with what you really want to know, while staying away from just very generic and scripted questions. Now, after you ask your last question, you're typically the one to initiate the close. The close, honestly, is the most important part of the interview. How I like to explain this is, think about a really good movie series that had you going the entire time, but then just ended horribly. You don't want that to be your interview. You don't want to have an amazing interview with a horrible close, because then honestly it'll leave a bad taste in the interviewer's mouth and they will not want to revisit your interview. So close hard, show interest, use the interviewer's name. Now, for a few best practices, what I would recommend doing is, as mentioned before, be likable. So smile, present yourself well with confidence. If it's a phone interview, feel free to stand up. Feel free to walk around. If it's an in-person interview, sit on the last 3 inches of your chair. That will help to keep you really engaged. Additionally, for that military background, or even for the team transition, what I would recommend doing is working on throwing out military bearing. You don't want to be that robot standing at attention. Instead, you want to be real. Use your hands. Be likable. Next, if it's a phone or a Skype interview, try to eliminate any distractions in the background. The distractions will not only throw you off your A game, but they will also serve as a distraction for the interviewer. So for the final step of the interview, make sure you know where you're going. Make sure you know what the next steps are. Sometimes you're interviewing with someone that might not have the ability to tell you what's next. So in that case, I would recommend following up with a thank you email just to see where you stand. Actually, in any case, a thank you email can never hurt. Okay, and those are just a few steps on winning that interview.